Are some words really untranslatable? One of the things that happens when you're a linguist is that people want to talk to you about untranslatable words. Saudade, sobremesa, Huga, flanner, Waldensamkeit, Schadenfreude. Ostensibly, these are words that defy translation. And it's almost a rite of passage that linguists learn, usually in their first year of schooling, to ask something like, what does that mean? And when someone responds, oh, saudade means the feeling of longing for something or someone you love which is gone. It's a bittersweet, empty feeling that carries the knowledge that the object of longing may never return. You respond, congratulations, you just translated it. The point being that saying something is untranslatable at best is just saying there's not a one-to-one correspondence where there's a single word you can slot in its place, and at worst is used to either prop up people as being culturally superior or less often to exoticize the speakers of a given language. And fair enough. Linguists attempting social justice is a pretty new phenomenon and a welcome change from what they were doing before. For a long time, that was my go-to response as well. I'd point out that you can translate and that any language can translate any concept. It just might not be a single word. It could be an adjective where another language uses a verb, or maybe you need a whole paragraph to explain it. I'd add that borrowing words is a valid thing too, so schadenfreude and charcuterie are now totally valid English words. And also, that's the name of my urbanwear and culinary lifestyle brand. If that were still the case, this would be a much shorter video. I'm actually coming around to the translation is impossible side of things. Let me explain why. If you're new to the channel, I'm Dr. Taylor Jones. I have a PhD in linguistics from the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm a language lover and avid language learner. You'd think that'd be obvious, but then you probably don't know a whole lot of linguists. Today, I'm talking untranslatable. Let's get into it. This is Language Jones. If you watch other videos on my channel, you know that I don't take a lot of sponsors, and in fact, I turn down the overwhelming majority of potential sponsors, but I keep promoting lingopie. The reason is simple. I'm addicted. I've got a lingopie Jones. Lingopie is a subscription video on-demand platform for language learners with real-life, authentic video content in your target language and simultaneous interactive subtitles in both the original and English. You can slow down or even loop sentences.
En fait, j'ai une galère.
Isolate and define individual words, add them to flashcards, and even get quizzed on previous material. And instead of working through a textbook before you go out in the world and engage with your language, you can use lingopie to watch authentic content in your target language from day one. You can record your own voice for pronunciation feedback. They've even added video lessons and my personal favorite, news in easy French and news in easy Spanish, and so on. I know that a main topic of conversation whenever I visit family in France is current events and world news, and now I have an easy way to both keep up to date and make sure I have the appropriate vocabulary to express myself. Not only that, but they have a Netflix integration that means you can watch hit shows, and they've got a Disney Plus integration so you can watch all the animated content and all the Marvel you want. Not to mention, you can finally hear what they really sound like under those helmets in The Mandalorian. Or should I say, Le Mandalorian.
Ça me va.
They've got content in French, Spanish, German, Italian, Portuguese, Korean, Japanese, Russian, and Mandarin. They've got a Black Friday offer right now, so if you'd like to try lingopie, click my link in description or go to learn.lingopie.com/languagejones. Now back to the video. Here's a secret. Most of the linguists I know have a very deep knowledge about very specific subjects and a very glancing knowledge of a wide breadth of subjects in linguistics. So for instance, I don't really speak more than 10 words of Japanese, but I can tell you all about case marking in Japanese because it's often used in examples discussing case marking across languages. But one of the things that happens is that you get received wisdom that is just sort of known in the field, but not really evaluated because it's not our areas of expertise anyway. And this stuff gets passed down in intro to linguistics after intro to linguistics, and by the time you've got a PhD, you're not really going back and reevaluating every little thing you learned your first semester as an undergrad. But some of it is wrong. So for instance, the idea that Creole languages always start as trade pigeons and then develop more sophisticated grammatical structures. This is hugely contentious in Creolistics, and I've read a very convincing argument that the pigeon stage is not really supported or even solidly empirically attested at all. Another example is the hatred for the debunked Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. No, not that Whorf. The strong form of it is basically the claim that your language constrains or even determines what you can think. This one's going to come back in a minute. So we learn all the ways the strong form was debunked, as well as the harm it was used to do. You've heard me criticize it on the channel if you've watched enough of my videos. But here's the thing. The harm and the debunking all preceded a lot of research in neuroscience and specifically in psycholinguistics. It's still bunk, but we might have thrown the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. Because there's a burgeoning field of study of unconscious bias, or as the National Science Foundation now refers to it, implicit cognitive processes, that demonstrates that we have, shall we say, mental grooves that are easier to fall into, patterns of thought that are easier. And they're instantiated in language. So if you do the Harvard implicit association test, it might have you sort positive and negative words and white or black faces or women and men or whatever. And one kind of sorting could be harder or easier, which might indicate an unconscious bias. But that effectively means that we're mapping words to unrelated concepts. There's also all sorts of priming experiments that indicate all sorts of cool unconscious stuff going on. And don't worry, I'll tie this back to untranslatable words in a second. So to limit myself to one example, when you show people a list of like 100 random words, but in that list are words like bowl, spoon, cracker, waiter, tomato, and so on, just randomly interspersed with the other 95 words, when you ask people to fill in the missing letter in S-O blank P, they're statistically much more likely to say the letter U is missing compared to a baseline, or when you have words like wash, shower, hands, car, etc. That is, despite never seeing the word soup, they're primed by related words to think of soup faster than soap. Some of you might have already guessed where I'm going with this. So we all learned that untranslatable words aren't really a thing, because obviously you can translate. Any untranslatable word, you can tell me what it means. In fact, that's like the only scenario in which you see the word untranslatable. Somebody uses it and then immediately translates the word, both literally and figuratively. Kummerspeck is literally grief bacon, but it figuratively means the weight gained from overeating due to emotional distress. We should totally have that word. Well, congrats, Linda, we do now. And I'm told Germans don't even really use that. It's more of an English speaker's idea of a German word, like how the French have borrowed relooking from English, despite the fact that nobody in the history of English has ever had a relooking instead of a makeover. We should totally borrow that into English. But the imagined foreignisms are a different topic for a different day. So, what changed my thinking about untranslatable words? Well, a few things. But the main two were reading more about psycholinguistics and priming, and really reflecting on cultural practices and when I choose not to translate despite ostensibly being able to. So remember the soup thing? When we think of soup, it triggers a bunch of linguistic and semantic associations. The linguistic associations are phonological and structural. Phonological meaning we're primed to recall words like suit and soap and super, and in fact we recall them much faster than usual. And structural meaning we're primed to be able to recall and use similar words like soupy or even other nouns, especially if they're things you eat or drink. That last bit leads me to the semantic associations as well. If I say the word soup, you can more easily recognize and generate words like gazpacho or chowder. And there's a priming effect for things super closely related. Was I primed to say super just then? And that priming effect diminishes the less related things are. So spoon is going to be primed not just because of the overlapping sounds, but also because of the lapping of soup that you do with a spoon. I did it again. Whereas dog might not be primed for most people. But if you always have soup on Tuesdays with your friend nicknamed Dog, or you always have soup after you walk your dog, or you regularly attend the Yulin Culinary Festival, maybe it is primed for you. The point being that a given word will activate a network of sounds and meanings, at least temporarily, in your brain. And much of this is well below the level of conscious awareness, and each of those words will activate a whole network, although less so in a series of cascading activations. Is anyone else thinking of a cascading tower of soup bowls? I really shouldn't write scripts when I'm hungry. Side note, priming is also why I was always annoyed that Jerry Seinfeld had an episode about the soup Nazi when Gazpacho Gestapo was right there. Right there. The second part is that cultures are instantiated in languages. Linguists are notoriously overly analytical and culturally oblivious, even the sociolinguists who don't think they are because they sometimes interview people. In fact, especially the sociolinguists. The syntacticians and historical linguists at least know they're dweebs. And I say that with love. So now we're not just talking about soup and spoons and such. Let's take Danish Huga, for instance.
Huga.
Denmark's tourism agency has an entire article explaining it, which I will do my best to condense, and I assume I'm going to pronounce it wrong every time. They say it's all about taking time away from the daily rush to be together with people you care about, or even by yourself, to relax and enjoy life's quieter pleasures. It comes from an older word that meant protected from the outside elements, which in Denmark are a serious thing. There's no agenda, and it details a spirit of equality and consensus. So I can conceptually define hygge, but I'm definitely missing a few elements. First, I don't know Danish, obviously, so I don't know the cascade of ideas that it triggers. What other words come to mind? What do they trigger? Instead, I have associations in English like cozy, warm, quiet, and so on, each with their own associations getting further and further afield from the network of associations triggered in Danish. Second, there's the question of lived experience and embodied cognition. That conceptual cascade is likely happening somewhere in the Wernicke's area and the Broca's area of the brain, but those aren't the only parts of the brain that light up when we hear or think of words. There's also the Henke's area. I'm kidding. But there are even areas that are well before we get to conscious thought that get triggered. We know from experiments that swear words in your native language light up your amygdala in a way that swear words in an L2 just doesn't. The hippocampus, the hypothalamus, and a handful of other regions are all implicated as well, and these relate to things like memory formation, sense memory, fear, and long-term learning, among others. So a Dane will have a totally different cascade of semantic activations and the actual physical embodiment of the memories that come from their lived experience. So it's possible that thinking about Huga might lower heart rate, for instance, faster. I'm not citing a study here, I'm just kind of spitballing, but you get the idea. So in a purely intellectual sense, Huga is totally translatable, and it would be absurd to say it's not. But in a deeper sense, around poetry and evocation and memory, translation itself is impossible. Even borrowing is impossible, which is why a charcuterie board is not the same as charcuterie. Charcuterie is malarkey. So I have this for languages I've learned with direct experience or prolonged cultural contact, but not the others. Because of course I do. There's 52 Saturdays a year, but Saturday doesn't evoke the same feeling as Shabbat, or even better yet, Shabbos. Shabbat's a big lunch after bar mitzvah of someone you don't know. Shabbos is Hamish. I think I'm actually starting to understand Huga. Somebody let me know if it's like a winter Shabbos with good friends and condensation on the windows from cold outside, but warm light inside from the candles, and a good conversation, and you're pleasantly full from a warm stew. Because I could be way off the mark here, but if that's Huga, sign me up. Anyway, I recognize that the strongest form of this position is basically that communication is impossible because your unique lived experience is different than mine, so your specific mental associations to any given word will be different. That's a bridge too far for me. I still think the red I see and the red you see are probably basically the same, and more than that, evoke many of the same things, just maybe not all. So we can translate the ideas, but we do something different by calling words untranslatable. We communicate to the listener that we want them not just to translate the word, but to actually reflect for a moment on the translation and how it doesn't line up perfectly with an individual word, and to actually imagine the lived experience. It's a hidden request for a form of radical imaginative empathy. Saying saudade, for instance, is untranslatable is not saying that the concept of nostalgia for something gone, never to return is impossible to understand, but it's demanding that the listener try to think about what that would mean in a Brazilian context. Not just imagining longing, but imagining the salty air of the South Atlantic Ocean on a warm December night. Quiet nights of quiet stars, or whatever. So what's your take? Leave me a comment with your favorite untranslatable word and its translation. If you like what I'm doing with the channel, you can always support it right here on YouTube with super thanks, or over on patreon.com/languagejones. If you like this video, YouTube's got another for you on deck based on your unique viewing history, just like your understanding of words is based on your unique experiences. Until next time, happy learning.